Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this session of the book club. We have a particularly fascinating sounding book. I haven't read it, but it's called The Paris Library, and it has to do with things that happened during the Second World War and the role that the library and the people, the employees of the library, played in a very, very humanitarian sense. To present the book, we have Sunita Shetty, who is a marketing professional who works in the IT industry and is not only an avid reader, but is also a very talented storyteller. You really should listen to her telling stories. And of course, today will in a way be a storytelling, won't it, Sunita? And she also sings. So very, very talented person. Sunita, happy to have you with us today. Go ahead, over to you.
Thank you so much, Moini, and good evening, everybody. Always exciting to come and present a book here. I do want to tell you that I want to start with why did I pick the Paris Library? So this book was published in February of this year, and it came up somewhere on social media. And of course, it had the word Paris in it. For all those who know me, I'm a big Francophile. I lived some years in Paris. So of course, promptly I bought the book. It's a true story. The characters, what happened during World War II at the American Library in Paris. It's all true. So it was very intriguing. So that was the reason I bought it. Of course, the other thing was that I lived in Paris, for 3 years. I did my master's there, but I had never visited. I have never visited the American Library in Paris. So now there is a reason for me to go back. I have gone back to Paris multiple times, but I have never visited the American Library in Paris. So this, ladies and gentlemen, gives me yet another reason to go back to Paris. But that's not the reason why I wanted to present this book. I want to tell you that with every page I read, this book reminded me so much of our book club, of what we do, the community that we have here, our love for reading, our love for books, what this book club and how it transformed itself during the COVID times. And I think I know the joy that it has brought me during these very troubled months of COVID, that I want to dedicate this, truly. I want to dedicate this to Satish and Moini. Thank you so much for doing this, for every single person on this call, to Kaveri, to Farooq, to Aruna, to the Kulkarnis,
and Sunita,
everybody who's there.
And to Sunita.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this joy that this book club brings. So Satish, Mohini, Gyanadab, Farooq, this one's for you. Okay, so with that, let me get started with the book. The book is called The Paris Library. Let me just share my screen. I'll just show a couple of slides and then I'll begin my presentation. So there you are. That's the author for you, Janet Charles. She's an award-winning author. She has one novel which she's written before this, Moonlight in Odessa, which won a couple of awards. And then she spent a lot of time doing research. She actually worked at the American Library in Paris. And that's when she found and discovered that the library played such an important role in World War II. And then she went and did a whole bunch of research, and she wrote this book. She finished writing it in 2016, and it got published now in 2021. So I think all the authors in the audience know how difficult it is to get a book published. But that's how long it took for the book to get published. But it's got some great reviews even now. As you can see, it's also published in French and in many other languages. The French one is titled as Une soif de livre et de liberté, which is a thirst for books and liberty. And there's an interesting reason why they didn't keep the same name, but we'll come to that another time. I just want to show you that this is a picture of the American Library in Paris. The black and white picture is taken, of course, when it was first opened in the 8th arrondissement at that time. They've now moved to the 7th. It is really, as they say, it is now in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower. You can see the Eiffel Tower right behind, and it continues to thrive. It is the largest library in Europe that's there and continues to do exceedingly well over there. Okay, I'm going to stop my share. I don't like to make presentations, and you'll just have to hear me speak about the book. So let's get started. The book is set. There are 2 parallel tracks in the book. One is Paris. Okay, it starts with Paris in February of 1939, and the other parallel track is in Freud, Montana, in 1983. And the protagonist, her name is Odile Souchet. Odile Souchet in 1939 is a young girl in Paris. You know, she's French. She's just finished studying to be a librarian. She knows the Dewey Decimal System really, really well. For all of y'all who don't know what a Dewey Decimal System is, I read it for the first time in the book. It's about how books are classified and numbered. You know, so all libraries follow the classification. So anywhere in any library in the world, you can go and find a book just by using this Dewey Decimal System. So in 1939, they talk about Odile, who's a young girl, and then of course the Montana track is about the war bride Odile, much older, living in Montana now, and her tryst with a young teenager, and the parallel tracks you know go along in the book, and they, you know, and that's how the story goes. But I'll just stick to go making it linear so that it's easier for us to follow the story. So there we are. February 1939, Odile Souchet is a young girl. She's going, the first chapter is about her being terribly excited about going for her interview at the American Library in Paris. She knows the Dewey Decimal System really, really well. In fact, through the book, whenever Odile is in trouble and she thinks of a word, it's always in terms of the number of the Dewey Decimal System. I'm going to just read out the first, you know, the first chapter just a little bit, just to set the tone of the character and who she is. So I'm going to read that, okay? My favorite part of library school has been Dewey Decimal System. Conceived in 1873 by the American librarian Melville Dewey, it uses 10 classes to organize library books on shelves based on subject. There was a number for everything, allowing any reader to find any book in any library. For example, Mama took pride in her 648, housekeeping. Papa wouldn't admit it, but he really did enjoy 785, chamber music. My twin brother was more of a 636.8 person, cats, while I preferred 636.7, dogs. I arrive on Le Grand Boulevard, where in the space of a block, the city shrugged off her working class mantle and donned a mink coat. The coarse smell of coal dissipated, replaced by the honeyed jasmine of joy, worn by women delighting in the window display of Nina Ricci's dresses and Kislav's green leather gloves. Further along, I wound around musicians leaving the shop that sold wrinkled sheet music, past the Baroque building with the blue door, turned the corner onto a narrow side street. I knew the way by heart. I loved Paris, a city with secrets, like book covers, some leather, some cloth. Each Parisian door led to an unexpected world. A courtyard could contain a knot of bicycles, or a plump concierge arrived with a broom. In the case of the library, the massive wooden door opened to a secret garden. Bordered by petunias on one side, lawn on the other, the white pebbled path led to. I crossed the threshold beneath French and American flags fluttering side by side and hung my jacket on the rickety coat rack. Breathing in the best smell in the world, a melange of the mossy smell of musty books and crisp newspaper pages, I felt as if I'd come home. So that's our protagonist, the one who loves Paris, the one who loves the library, the one who loves books. There she was. And in this world of the library, she gets to meet the director. And this is a real life person, okay? Her name is Miss Dorothy Reeder. It's a nice name was a woman of great character. She came and joined the library in 1920 and then stayed on, in the library. Then we're introduced to the head librarian, whose name is Boris. He's Russian. Nobody knows where Boris came from. He's a strapping guy. There are stories about Boris, leaving the Russian Revolution, coming to Paris. There are all kinds of stories about Boris, but he's now Franco-Russian. He's there. Very, very straight, somebody who hates racism, somebody who always stands for something that's right. That's Boris there for you. Then, of course, they have a very eclectic, this is really the hub of humanity. And, the author so beautifully describes every character that is there, that works in the library, that comes, visits the library. And I want to tell you, it reminds me so much of our book club. You will find in the characters, you will find a Mohini, and you will find a Satish, and you will find a Professor Sinha. And, that I just discovered, I could see them as I read the book. So many characters. There's Professor Cohen, who teaches at the Sorbonne. She's a writer. She lectures, and she's the kind of person who makes literature accessible for everybody. There are two guys, one English and one French, who are there at the library every day, and like an Englishman and a Frenchman, they're constantly bickering and fighting, but they're the greatest of friends. And there's always the arguments between the two are so interesting to read. Then there's Bitsy. Bitsy is a young girl about our protagonist's age, about Odile's age. She's in charge of the children's library. Odile and she become friends very, very quickly. They're almost the same age. They love books. And the first time they meet, they talk about the brothers Karamazov. And, when I read it, that was exactly the time Professor Sinha was doing it for the book club. That was the first time I heard about the book, really. And it was happening right here. So the girls bond very, very well because they love books. So that's Bitsy, who's in charge of the children's library. There's Margaret, who comes. Margaret is another young girl who's married to an attaché to the English embassy that's there. She's English. She's very, very unhappy in Paris. She doesn't speak the language. She can't pick up the language well. She goes for these big embassy parties where, it's a crowd that she doesn't like politics at all. They're all talking about what's happening in the world. And she's so unhappy. And somebody asks her to go to the American library. And the first day that she goes there, she meets with Odile. And Odile, like everybody else in the library, just takes everybody under their wing. And she, chats with her and finds out what she likes to read and suggests books that she should be reading. And the two become very, very good friends. So Odile's good friends are really Bitsy and Margaret. Margaret just is so excited about meeting Odile. And finally, Odile tells her that if you're not doing anything, why don't you come and volunteer at the library? And that's exactly what Margaret does. And she loves that because in the library, nobody is talking about what her husband does. Everybody is talking about what book have you read? And that she loves very much. So these become great, great friends. Then I want to introduce Odile's family. Odile has a twin brother, Remy. Remy is studying law, but increasingly, is getting agitated with where the world is going, about the war that's happening, that is looming large, that people are talking about, very unhappy with the political system. The father is a commissioner in the police, typically a very, very strict man, constantly, reprimanding Remy for what he's doing, that he's useless, he's not taking part in sports, he's not doing well in his studies. He's that kind of a father, very upset with Odile that she wants to take up a job. I mean, what will people say, right? This is the time for her to get married. And her father every Sunday brings one person who works in his team. So some policeman or the other is coming home for lunch, so that, just as a suitor for Odile. So if Odile likes that person, then at least his daughter will get married and give up on this job. And of course, there's Odile's mother, who's a homemaker, and and also plays a very important part in the entire family that's there. So that's where we are. I must say that in all the bringing all the suitors, suitor number 14 is Paul, and he is somebody that Odile finally likes. And Odile likes him because when Paul comes home, he takes up for Odile, and when a father says, I don't understand why she needs to take up a job, and Paul says, I think it's good for women to be independent. And then when the father says something about Remy, Paul takes up for Remy as well, and that sort of wins Odile's heart. So they become good friends. Paul, of course, starts visiting the library every day then. Okay, so this is where we are. These are all the characters that are there. As the story goes along, Odile loves her job. She enjoys being in the library. She enjoys, what's happening. She works hard. She works till late. One day she invites Remy, her twin brother, to the library, and Remy meets Bitsy, who's in charge of the children's library, and sparks fly, and the two of them, sort of fall in love. And Odile is quite amused by this. She and her twin are very, very close. Okay. She shares everything with him. He shares everything with her. She knows everything about Remy. And one day, Remy invites Bitsy home, and everybody's very excited because they know that there's going to be an engagement. And while all that happens, Remy also announces that he's quitting doing law and he is going to go to the front. And this shocks everybody at the table. It shocks Odile because she can't believe that her brother took a decision without telling her first about it. And from the look on Bitsy's face, she knows that Bitsy knew about it, but she didn't. So she's very, very upset. But what is done. She supports her brother, and he goes off to the front. And Miss Reader, who's the director of the library, is now, the talk of the war is getting louder and louder. People want to leave. The director, is helping people go back home. All the men are getting enlisted. Boris, who's the head of the Russian, who's the head librarian, gets enlisted as well. And Miss Reader sends a letter off saying, no, he's required in the library. This is an essential service. And through all her contacts, gets Boris back. So Boris comes back. He doesn't have to fight in the war. And Miss Reader sees that there is so much trouble brewing around that she tells her staff that if you want to leave and you want to go back to your countries, go back to your, stay at home, you're welcome to do that. But none of them do. Miss Reader decides to say, and they decide to stay because the library must be kept open. This is the place, they so strongly believe that this is a place that gives people so much joy, right? The books give people so much joy. This is what is going to change people's minds. So the library must be kept open. So they all support Miss Reader and they all stay back. Miss Reader then, they work towards sending books to the front. Every day what they do is they're packing books to send to the soldiers, both the French soldiers and the English soldiers along the front. And there's some lovely letters that they get back where the soldiers say that this is really their moment of joy when they can sit with a book and be able to read it. So they were so grateful to the library for doing this. These are tough times. The library, subscriptions have stopped. It's, the library runs on subscriptions. So they're scrambling, looking for donations, supplies are running short, but all of them work together to be able to get this going. Okay. Now let's come back to Paul and Odile. Paul and Odile are now falling in love. They meet every day. He comes home more often, but there's always somebody at home. So the romance is sort of just brewing. They haven't yet told each other that they love each other, but it's just bubbling along. That's there. And there's often talk of marriage, and talk of marriage in the sense that Remy writes to Odile's brother will write to her saying, you're so in love with Paul. Why don't you just marry him? Don't wait for the war to get over. And she writes back to him and says, no, I will marry him only when you come back. I will not marry him till you're back. So that's where it is. Okay. Back to Paris. Now imagine the war is happening, right? And the city of Paris is completely deserted. Miss Reader, the director, is walking to the library. She's got her bag in her hand and she's got a gas mask in the other. She's walking through streets that are completely deserted. She passes by the Champs-Élysées and she says, there's no traffic at all. If you drop a pin, you can hear the pin, right? Rations are running low. And you're walking in the morning through the empty streets of Paris, and there is no smell of fresh croissants happening at all. So times are really, really tough in Paris. The ambassador of the United States insists that she at least moves from a house to the Bristol Hotel. And, because she refuses to go back to the United States. The Nazis have already plundered the Polish library. They've arrested the librarian there, but she just absolutely refuses. She believes that she's on a mission. That's what the library is there for, and she is not going to leave. So he at least gets her to move to the hotel where a lot of Americans are staying and they're being protected over there. One day, they know it's going to happen. Right? They know one day the Nazi soldiers are going to walk in, and one day they do. And the person who walks into the library and everybody is standing there scared. And the gentleman walks into the library and meets with the director, and the two of them smile and shake hands. So Dr. Fuchs, who is the library protector of the Nazis, is somebody who is very well known to Dorothy Reader. They met in some conference. They're both librarians, both had great love for books. So it was wonderful that, the two of them were there. They had a conversation. But when he leaves, he does say to be careful, and certain people must not come to the library anymore. And certain books must not be there in the library anymore. And since both of them love books, they know that the books will not be destroyed, that they can be kept away, but they must not be caught with those books. So it's another thing that 40 works had to be packed up and had to be hidden and kept away. And Odile's heart is breaking that these books had to be kept away. Imagine Paris would lose some part of its soul if its readers couldn't read these great works. But that was the way it was supposed to be. And what about the subscribers who couldn't come, those certain people who were not going to be allowed to the library? And Ms. Reader and Boris call the team together and tell them that, they've decided that the two of them are going to take the books to the subscribers. Now, of course, the certain people are Jews, right? They're not allowed to come into the library. And the librarian decides that no, if they can't come, we will take the books to them. Now, this is putting their lives at risk, but that's what they decide to do. And every team member says, yes, this is what we must do. We must take the books to them. So if you remember, I spoke about Professor Cohen. She's the one who teaches literature, who's a writer. Now, Professor Cohen was one of those certain people who could not come to the library. So they give young Odile the books to take to her house. And there are some very, very vivid scenes of the times when Odile is carrying the books with her and there is a checkpoint. And she is so nervous because she has kept Professor Cohen's address written on a scrap of paper in her satchel. And she's so worried that, my God, they're going to find her address and she's going to put Professor Cohen into trouble. But fortunately, she manages to get away. She, the Nazi looks at the books and then he lets her go. And she goes to this. So she's never been to Professor Cohen's house. So this wonderful big building. It's got those typical, curvy staircases that go up. And she goes to Professor Cohen's house. She stands outside and she can hear the clickety clack of the typewriter. And she goes in. She meets with Professor Cohen, and she's so happy. Professor Cohen is so happy to meet her because she's had such a rough time. The Nazis have come. They have destroyed the books in her house. They have destroyed all her documents that she had. And she still has a great spirit. And she says, well, life goes on. And she's writing a new book now. And, she reads out bits of it to Odile. And Odile is so happy. It fills her heart with happiness to be there with Professor Cohen. So many times when she goes to Professor Cohen's house, Odile is always worried because she goes through the Nazi checkpoint. She's worried that they'll follow her. So she is always very, very careful to make sure that she's not putting Professor Cohen into any kind of trouble. Things are getting worse. All the foreign staff are told to go home. The accountant, Mrs. Weld, gets arrested. And one day when somebody doesn't come home, then people get worried, like it doesn't come to work in the library. Then the staff are all worried as to what has happened to this person, So as all the foreign staff were in trouble, so Mrs. Weld got arrested. Boris, right, the Russian who's the head librarian, one day the Nazis enter his house. He is playing cards with his friends. He, of course, refuses to stand up when they come in. And they come with guns. They insist that they all stand up and put their hands up. And Boris refuses to do that, and he gets shot. He gets shot in the lung. He's eventually taken away. They don't have any news about him. The whole library is so worried. They eventually find that he's taken to hospital, but he's taken many days later. So the infection has spread. But anyway, he survives. Boris survives and eventually comes back. Margaret, who's Odile's very, very good friend, who's English. Margaret one day is, and they're very worried about Margaret, and they keep telling her to go back, but she refuses to. Her marriage is in trouble. Her husband is already left and gone. Margaret one day when she's walking back home, gets caught at a Nazi checkpoint, and she's taken and thrown into prison. And she's there in prison with 3 other ladies, right? And she's so worried because she has a young daughter who's alone at home. And Margaret is just on her way back from the library. She has a book with her, the Priory, and they don't know what to do. So Margaret, sits and says, let me read you the book to cheer all the ladies up in the cell. And she reads the first chapter of the book. And the ladies all eventually fall asleep. Somewhere in the middle of the night, a Nazi soldier comes and wakes her up and tells her, I'm going to let you go, but you have to promise me something. You have to promise me that you'll meet me every day and read that book for me. And she says, I'll do that only if you allow all the other ladies to go as well. And that's how Margaret gets freed from there. But she does eventually go and meet with the Nazi soldier, the young Nazi soldier Felix, and reads for him every day. And there is a relationship that builds there. So imagine having a relationship with a German soldier. That happens there. Okay, we're coming back to Paul and Odile. Paul and Odile are now madly in love. They want to take the relationship to the next level. They're never alone. They manage to go for one evening out. That's the only time that they get to be alone. And Odile tells him, please, let's meet up somewhere. Then Paul then gets the key to an apartment, and the two of them go, and it's a huge apartment. It's empty. And the two of them make love, and it becomes an everyday thing. And she's so happy. She's so happy. She knows that this is the man for her. In all this, her brother Remy, who's at the border, eventually dies. He's wounded and he doesn't get medical attention, and he dies. And it's a very, very sad time in Odile's life. But Paul is really the man who gives her, the enthusiasm to go ahead in life. Paul, by the way, is with every day is very, very angry with everything that he sees around him. He hates his job. The kind of things that they make them do is something that goes against his grain. He hates his job. When he's walking on the streets, he hates what he sees. One day he's walking with Odile, and he sees the German soldiers with French women, right, who are, because it is such dire conditions because of the war, that the women are, willing to sleep with the German soldiers. They're, taking money from them. So they're wearing good clothes, they're eating good food. They're the ones sitting in the cafes with the German soldiers. And this enrages Paul. He just is so angry. He thinks that they're traitors, that they're doing this. And Odile sort of constantly keeps trying to tell him that there is, you don't know what their story is. People need to survive. But Paul is just filled with a rage that's there. Okay. Coming back, we're now at about 1941. So some years are going by and all this madness that's happening. Pearl Harbor happens. Now America is, full-fledged into the war. And the trustees of the American Library tell Miss Reader that she has to go back to the United States. So she does leave and go. There is a countess who's a trustee, an American, but she's married to a French gentleman. She takes over as the director. And they struggle, but the library is still open. Thanks to the countess's political connections through her husband, the library is not shut. Now what happens is, one day Paul is asked to go and make an arrest. And Paul goes to this big, building, which has a circular curved staircase. He goes and he's about to knock on the door and he hears the clickety-clack of a typewriter. The door opens and he tells the lady there that, ma'am, you have to come with me to the station. And she looks at him and says, you are Odil's man, aren't you? And she recognizes him. It's because they're all such a small community. And that community in the library is so lovely. They all know each other. They know what's happening in each other's lives. So she, of course, recognizes Paul, although Paul doesn't recognize her. And he says, I'm sorry, but you have to come with me to the station. It's just for some questioning. And Paul believes that Professor Cohen will come back to her house. And Professor Cohen knows better. As she's leaving, she picks up a book that she has, and Paul tells her, "Oh, good, yeah, it's good to take a book. You never know how long it'll take there." And she takes the book and gives it to Paul and tells her, "Please give this to Odile. She'll know what needs to be done." And that's when Paul realizes that this is somebody from the library. Anyway, he takes her. She does get arrested. Needless to say, there's no news of Professor Cohen after that. The librarian goes to deliver books. They knock on the door many times, many days go by, but there's no news of her. Odile can't believe that, Professor Cohen is not there. She goes herself and she goes and she bangs on the door and the door opens, but there's somebody else in that house. And they say, no, this is not Professor Cohen's house. This is my house now. And they shut the door on her. And she is so worried. And she can't find Paul. Paul hasn't visited her in many days and she doesn't know what's happening. And of course, many, many days later, Paul finally comes and confesses to Odile that he was the one who arrested Professor Cohen. And she's so angry with him. She's so angry with him. She tells him, you tell me where she is right now, because we have to save her. And he said, I'm just such a small peg in this whole thing. I'm such a, I'm a peon. He said, if you really want to know where Professor Cohen is, go ask your father. Your father is a commissioner. He'll know. And she storms off to her father's office. Her father is not there. She's sitting at her father's desk. And she sees this bunch of papers on the table. And they're all letters written anonymously by people to the police saying that we know that there is this person in this building who is a Jew. And there are letters for the library itself, right? That we know that, that this person is visiting the library. The library is encouraging people to go there, and the library has books, and there are all these letters about people, and the police are acting on it. That's how the police are getting information. She's so angry. She takes a bunch of papers and she's about to throw it into the dustbin when her father walks into the room. And she's so angry with him. She's so angry with him. And she says, how could you do this? How can you do this to our own people? And her father says, there's a war going on. This is what needs to be done. I need my job. I need to feed you and your mother. Okay, so this is what is going to be done. And she is so angry. She tears up the letters. She goes back home. She's so livid, and she realizes that it's the letters that are causing all these problems. Yeah, it's through these letters that the police are knowing. That many days after that, she quietly slips into her father's office, picks up the letters, stuffs it into a satchel, and comes home and tears it all up. Right? she's very, very angry with Paul, but eventually they do make up. In 1940, it's already 1944 now. There's news of the occupation ending. There's celebration all around, and there's a horrible parade that is taken through the streets, right, as the Germans are retreating and going back, of all the women, who have, partnered with the Germans, all of them who were the whores and the sluts, and they're paraded through the streets of Paris. Their heads are shaved off. Their children are marched naked through the streets. And Odile's heart sinks to see this. And Paul is only filled with more and more rage that is there. At some point, Paul then comes to Odile and one day and tells her, he seems very agitated. He tells Odile, let's elope and get married. Please, let's do it now. And Odile is surprised at something like this, that this request. And he says, I've got the marriage license. So he's a policeman, he gets that. And he seems to be in a grand hurry. And by now, Odile has sort of forgiven him for what has happened. And she says, all right. And, they leave a note and they leave immediately. They take the train, they go to the country where Paul's aunt is. There's something that's not right with Paul, but Odile is so excited about the wedding, and they get married and they come back, and, and the library throws a big party for them. And when that party happens, Margaret is not there. And Odile is very worried as to where Margaret is. She hasn't seen Margaret. So she does go to Margaret's house, and I'm not going to give any spoilers, but she discovers things that are greatly disturbing. She steps out of the house, and she's sitting, lonely and sad, and just unable to deal with what she has seen and heard. And there's this American soldier, Buck, who comes and bumps into her, chats with her. The two of them spend some time together. He's somebody who's not part of her previous life, and she feels a great connection with him. Within 2 days, Buck sort of asks her to marry him, and she says yes, and leaves immediately. She leaves a note for Bitsy saying that I'm going, please take care of my parents. She doesn't even go back home to say bye to her parents. She leaves a note to tell Bitsy to take care of Margaret, to take care of her parents, that she loves Bitsy very much like her own twin. And she leaves for the United States, never to come back to Paris. That's how the Montana story happens, because here's Odile now in Montana, and she befriends her teenage neighbor, and that's how the story sort of plays out between one another. And that's how the story ends in that way. So that's the story, ladies and gentlemen. It's a true story that is there, very, very wonderful, wonderfully told about the power of literature, the power of books, the community that it can build, what it can do to get people together, to get people to bond. And I can't think of a better book to dedicate to this book club than this one. So I'll stop now and open it out for any questions and discussions that are there.
Thank you very much. Very nicely said. One thing I just wanted to tell you, one of our regular readers of the book club, Gladys came in the 50s as a librarian to help India get into the library mold. And she was there, and that's why she met Kothawala, and they got married, and she became an Indian all her life. Okay, so, and she had problems with the eyesight, etc. So she would be listening to books on sound,